Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of appropriate ages, get ready for another episode of AZA Commander Podcast. Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to the AZA Commander Podcast, where we talk about the Magic the Gathering Commander format. My name is a Zombie Apocalypse, and I hear if you say my name's Steve 3 times, I will be in your next Commander game.
Hello again, my friends and my occasional opponents. I am Jetterex, and I also answer to Tim, but only if you ask really nicely. Today on the podcast, we're going to dazzle you all with another deck tech featuring commanders from more recent sets.
But before we get started, we wanted to remind you the best ways to support the podcast is to follow us on your favorite podcast listening apps and watch this and other videos on the YouTube channels, and tune into our streams on Twitch. Links will be in the description below. So let's talk about what is going to be today going to be like.
This time, our deck techs come courtesy of 2 relatively new sets, Wilds of Eldraine and Universes Beyond Doctor Who, exploring both high fantasy and wibbly-wobbly time-travel-y sci-fi. We're going to take turns describing the decks, including what drew us to the commander, our choices for synergy and support, and general power level assessment after playing the decks a little bit. Before we get this party started, here is a word from our sponsors. During the holiday season, we don't all have time to visit 100 different shops in search of that perfect gift. Our list gets longer every year, and sometimes you need to know that you can find everything you need in one convenient location. If this sounds like you, then come on down to the Trading Post. Here at the Trading Post, we offer a variety of goods and services to meet all your holiday shopping needs. For that nosy relative who needs to get a life, just discard a card and you can get them for life instead. Need to bolster your livestock herd? Just pay 1 life and you get your very own goat. Everyone has that one person who is impossible to shop for. Consider using our Return from the Graveyard services. You'll never forget their face when they are reunited with their long-lost pet for the low cost of sacrificing only 1 creature. You can't beat these prices. We even turn boring old artifacts into new opportunities. Trading Post truly has something for everyone, so come pay us a visit today. Only 4 generic mana for entry into a world of possibilities. I mean, I know we are both card-carrying members of Trading Post. We cannot recommend their services enough. I mean, I put that card in everything.
Absolutely.
Now, down to business. I'm going to let Zombie go first this episode with his creation from Universes Beyond Doctor Who. Allons-y! So, Zombie, tell us, who is the commander you ended up with? What attracted you to that commander?
All right, well, I actually have 2 commanders for us today, and the first commander is the 14th Doctor. So he's a really great commander. He's either red, green, white, blue. Whenever you cast this, he's a legendary creature, Time Lord Doctor. He's a 3/4. Whenever you cast this spell, reveal the top 14 cards of your library, put all Doctor cards revealed this way into your graveyard, and the rest into the bottom of your library in a random order. You may have the 14th Doctor enter the battlefield as a copy of a Doctor if it was put into your graveyard, there from your library this turn. If you do, it gains haste until end of turn. Really great commander. And then the next, the partner I have with it is Rose Noble. She is a 4 mana legendary creature human, 2/3 with Ward 2 because they have to put that on everything. Whenever you cast a Doctor spell or creature spell with Doctor's Companion, draw a card. And then she also has Doctor's Companion. So those 2 commanders are really good. I actually foiled over a couple of other different partners. Sarah Jane Smith was another commander I was thinking of pairing with it, and I was also thinking of Clara Oswald to add black, but I figured there wouldn't be that many black cards that I need to add, so I decided to go with the set card draw versus the pay for card draw later.
It's awesome. It's awesome when
Yeah.
I think about the I didn't like I know it's new and it's in a lot of ways we don't actually have it yet, but the 14th Doctor is so fascinating in terms
Mhm.
of how it interacts with the rest of your deck. So I can see and having that it is actually four colors and the color identity is pretty meaningful as well because
Right.
it gets all those colors into your deck. So as far as rule intro goes, what do you like to talk about when you're discussing this deck with other people?
So first thing I have to say is, hey, are you okay with I use cards that aren't out yet? Because the 14th Doctor and Rose Noble don't come out until about April. I already have them purchased. Don't worry, guys. It's okay. Uh, but they don't come out until April. So I have to ask, but I'm pretty sure people wouldn't have a problem with it. And then the other things that I have is I gave myself a deck building constraint. And that deck building constraint was I could only use cards from the Doctor Who precons because I wanted this deck to be as flavorful as possible with all the Doctor Who cards. Other things that I like to mention, it's slow to start off, but once it gets going, like it's a value engine deck. So like once I'm going, it pedal to the metal. And then I also say it's a low 6 because man, it's hard to get a win with this deck. So
It makes a lot of sense to me. I think that having played against it a number of times, it does. We both have decks that do this similar thing where it has a lot of board state, and the stuff that is on your board has a lot of actions. So you take a lot of game actions with the deck, so your turns can be really long. And what can be frustrating sitting across from it, and again, we both play decks that do this, so I'm not frustrated by it, but I know it can be frustrating. Is that it can take a long turn and feel like it didn't really do anything.
right. Yeah, attacks are very hard in this deck for the most
Yeah,
part.
yeah. So you already answered this a little bit. I'll give you, but the next question that we ask in this section asks more about that. But as far as the theme, the build limit, what do you have to say about that? Or tell us a little bit more about the build limit and the theme.
Sure. So the build limit is that I only use cards from the precons because I did make a version of this deck that didn't stick to it, and it was absolutely busted, and it kind of lost its identity with the Doctor Who things. Like it had a lot of doctors in it, but it didn't. It wasn't a Doctor Who deck. Um, and I wanted to be able to use the main themes of the Doctor Who decks. So, specifically speaking, the historic matters and the paradox matter cards. It was a little hard to squeeze in the suspend and time counters and stuff as well. Because the original version had more of it, but it was just pulling in too many different directions, and it wasn't able to do much. So those were the themes that I applied to the deck.
It's interesting to kind of hear how trying to smash together those different themes actually caused problems, ultimately leading you to make different decisions. And
Right.
and it's fascinating to see which one kind of won out over the other as doing what you needed it to do.
Yeah, because it's interesting. The paradox matters and the historic matters work well together. And then like the suspend and paradox matter work well together. But I figured it was easier to have cards that I cast from not my hand that happen to be historic, easier than having the time counters. And it's also just with the limited space that we have, it's hard to have 20 things on suspend and just keeping track of all those things and stuff like that. It made
Yeah.
it a lot more difficult.
Well, and I think that the kind of playing cards almost randomly doesn't really line up with the other themes or the other goals of the deck.
Right.
And so it's like, when you have a deck that's kind of spinning the wheel, right? That's playing roulette a little bit, you stack the deck so that the roulette always gets you something crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But with your limited card pool, that is harder. That's almost impossible to do because you can't go out there and get the bombs that really make something like that valuable.
I was about to say, I think my limited card pool was, I think, 375 cards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hard to build a 100 card deck out of 375 cards.
Right. So let's break that down. Moving into the kind of
Sure.
part where we talk about the deck breakdown. So tell us, the various different how many cards of each different category there are.
Okay, so I'm breaking the breakdown like most everyone does. I look at card draw, ramp, single target removal, and board wipes. I have 15-ish card draw cards. Uh, I have 13 ramp cards, 4 single target removal, and 4 board wipes. But they like it's very difficult because like a lot of the cards give me value, but it's not necessarily card draw, and it's better to say yes.
I think that we live in an era now where that, because I know we talked about this before, and impulse card draw, does that count as card draw? I think most people would agree that it does, that it is like incrementally not quite as good.
Right.
But does it really count? I mean, clues we talked about, like, does a card that produced clues count as card draw? And I would always argue that the answer is yes. It's slow card draw that costs mana, but it literally says draw a card on there. So
Mm-hmm.
what we qualify expands a little bit more whenever we kind of do this. So
Right.
tell us what cards stick out in each of those sections for you. What are the all stars?
So one of my favorite card draw spells that I've cast in this deck is the Wedding of River Song. And what this card does is the 3 mana where'd it go? Here it is. It's a 3 mana sorcery. It's 2 and a white. It says draw 2 cards, then you exile a non-land card from your hand with a number of time counters on it equal to its mana value. Then target opponent does the same. Cards exiled this way don't have suspend, gain suspend, and then I time travel. So every time that I've casted, I've gotten something good, and then like with me having other parts that just work with time counters, it's just been stellar every time I've played it. Um, one of one of the my ramp's nothing super special, but this is one of the I think the most unique ramp cards in the deck, and that is rotating fireplace. It is a 3 mana artifact that enters the battlefield tapped with a time counter on it. Then add an amount of colorless mana to your mana pool equal to the number of time counters on it. And then I can also pay 4 and tap it to time travel. And I can only activate that as a sorcery. So if I don't have anything to do, which is fairly unlikely, I can just time travel to make it a better mana rock. I do have other incidental things that make me time travel. For instance, the 10th Doctor, he's so handsome. But anyway, I think it's just one of the most unique uh, uh, RAM cards. And then let's go into the single targeted removal. The card that I picked is the Flux. It's not the best in the deck, but it is unique and it does multiple things, which is pretty awesome. The Flux is a 2 and 2 red saga that when the Flux deals 4 damage to target creature and opponent controls. And then that's chapter 1. And then chapter 2 through 5 are exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. And then chapter 6 is add 6 red mana. I've never gotten to the 6 red mana, but I can't.
I love that card, and it's funny because you say it's not the best targeted removal, and it isn't the most kind of versatile targeted removal because it just does 4 damage, but there's still a lot of juicy targets with
Right.
that. Often people's commanders can be killed with that. Like, really, there are commanders that are big beefy beaters, but most of the time they're not. Most of the time their stat lines aren't that impressive. If you look at the statistics on that, most commanders are killable by something like this. But most importantly, it just does so much other stuff that the opportunity cost for, like, okay, yes, this deals with something that is a nuisance, and then it draws me 3 more cards, and then if I get all the way to that last one, it gives me a huge turn. So I just think that the opportunity cost is pretty great there.
Yeah. And just to make a point, only 2 of my creatures, or 3 of my creatures, sorry, survive that 4 damage in my whole entire library. So
Yeah.
like I don't have too many creatures, but they all die from it. So it's pretty great. And again, my board wipe, it's nothing amazing. In fact, I think it's more of a card draw spell than a board wipe. But it does have a board wipe at the end, and it's the most unique in the deck, and that is Day of the Doctor. So chapters 1, 2, and 3 are the same, and it says exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a legendary card. You may play that card for as long as the Day of the Doctor remains onto the battlefield. Put the rest of those exiled cards onto the bottom of your library in a random order. And then chapter 4 says choose 3 doctors. You may exile all other creatures. If you do, Day of the Doctor deals 13 damage to you. So, I mean, it's another blasphemous act. It's really slow. Everyone sees it coming, and 90% of the time, I'm not going to activate or like allow it to exile. Because it is you may exile the rest. So a lot of the times, I'm just going to keep my creatures around, but you never know what's going to happen, and someday it's going to save the day.
Yeah, it's a unique one, right? And again, in this case, if you get it to work the way that you want it to, it's a little one-sided. And sure, that's 13 damage to you, but very, very absorbable in this format. And
Right.
and if you get it to go off the way that you wanted to, you still have the best 3 creatures on your board, and nobody else has anything. And
Right.
it exiles too, right?
Yep.
What a
Yep.
big deal that. What a big deal that is.
Yeah, it's pretty huge. So
So in the next section, we break down like what are the goals of the deck. So we usually choose, amongst ourselves, kind of choose what are 4 general things that the deck is trying to do, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the cards in each of those sections. So before you go into the itemized sections,
right.
Tell us about the 4 different areas that we're going to talk about.
So we kind of alluded to a couple of these parts earlier, and that's historic matters and paradox matter cards. Uh, the third goal is to get 13 doctors into play. To mention, and there's this reason why I'm saying specifically 13, because the last section is ways the deck can win. One of them requires that. So those are the 3 main goals of the deck. And then
just for the audience,
yes,
what does historic mean?
so historic is artifacts, legendaries, and sagas are historic spells. To clarify, paradox is casting a spell from anywhere other than my hand. So that means casting it from my command zone, casting it from my graveyard, casting it from exile, which Cascade does. So those are the paradox matter cards, and then those are what those 2 keywords kind of mean.
Okay, great. So the first section, historic matters. So casting, legendaries, artifacts, sagas. These cards care about those things. So what are the standouts in that area that you think have been great for you so far?
So my the first one that I like, and is honestly the favorite one out of this whole entire category, is the 6th Doctor. So he is a 6 mana legendary creature Time Lord Doctor. He's a 3/3, and he says, Time Lord's prerogative. Whenever you cast a historic spell, copy it. Except that it isn't legendary, this ability triggers only once each turn. Dude, let me tell you, when you have multiple doctors that do crazy things, it just gets wibbly wobbly, man. Like, it is hilarious. And like, there's some other cards that I'll mention that work really well with this in a later section. And having multiple sagas and things like that. It's just easy breezy, beautiful. It's, Time Lord's prerogative.
He's a little expensive, but he's got a great coat. He looks really sharp in it, and
You're right.
he doubles a spell every turn.
Well,
So when you double it, something like the flux,
right.
which is then going to incrementally get you value over the course of the next several turns, or like you said, any of the other doctors that give you incremental value, you just doubled that. And as long as you keep those creatures in play.
Works really well with my commander, considering it's a doctor. So if I mill it into the graveyard, I could pay 3 mana for this.
Excellent.
Seems pretty solid.
Oh, that's terrific. What a great interaction.
Yeah. So the next one is the fourth Doctor. He is also a very handsome devil. Uh, he is uh two, a green and a blue legendary creature, Time Lord Doctor. You're going to be hearing that a lot in my section here.
Mhm.
Um, and then he is a 4/4. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. I love interrupting people just to look. Okay. And then it says once each turn, you may play a historic land or cast a historic spell from the top of your library. When you do, create a food token. So yeah, I only get to get one card extra each turn, but I have a creature that allows me to cast um I think it's legendary creature specific, or you may cast creature spells as though they have flash. So most of my creatures are legendary. So it allows me to trigger it multiple times each turn. And then the food's not completely irrelevant. You know, it's not the best of the three tokens that you can get, but like I'll take an extra 3 life if I have extra 2 mana sitting around. Because there's like times where you have like a heroic intervention or a swords to plowshare in your hand, and there's just nothing you need to protect or save. So I'm just going to gain 3 life instead.
Right. And we know that there's and food technically historic permanence as well. So
Yep.
there's lots of other interactions that food might actually create.
And then I was thinking about putting this in my card draw section because that's exactly what this card does. But it's Traverse the Eternity. Uh, it's a 2 and 2 blue. Draw cards equal to the highest mana value among historic permanents you control. So interesting thing with the 14th Doctor. If I do clone a, you know, the 6th Doctor or the 8th Doctor, which are higher mana value things, I pay 3 mana for it, but it copies its casting cost. So if I cast Traverse and it happens to be the 6th Doctor or something, I'm drawing 6 cards off of it. So like sometimes like there's ways to kind of cheat higher mana cost things into play in this deck. And like when I've play tested it, generally I'm drawing 4 cards with it because most of the doctors cost 4. But like I'm gonna take 4 mana for 4 cards any day of the
Yep.
week.
Yep. I don't think anybody would argue against that. That is an excellent rate, no matter. And again, that if that's the floor, then it's terrific because the
Mhm.
ceiling is actually much higher than that.
Yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and hop into the Paradox Matter section. Uh, there's 2 cards that do something very similar, but I am gonna separate them because the first card is bigger on the inside. It's three, a red and a green. It's an enchant, artifact, or land. Enchanted permanent has target player adds 2 mana of any one color. The next spell they cast this turn has Cascade. So, things that I like to put this on are the food tokens or the clue tokens that I make, or anything along those lines, where it's like now this food token is ramp for me, and it also is giving me spells that I'm casting for free, not from my hand, which is really, really relevant. And if I'm not mistaken, that's actually a cast trigger. It's a triggered ability. So I have this one creature that I just added in here, and I really like it. It's Adric mathematical genius, and I can copy target activated or triggered abilities. So like I can make it double the mana, so I can get 4 mana, and then I would then cascade twice off of it, which is pretty sweet. So pretty fantastic card. The next card I want to talk about is the homeboy's vehicle, the TARDIS. So it is a 2 mana vehicle. It is a flyer. It's 2/4 stats. Whenever TARDIS attacks, if you control a Time Lord, the next spell you cast this turn has Cascade, and you may Planeswalk. Haven't had the Planeswalk thing come as an issue yet. Would love to try it someday. I have all the cards for it, but again, space is limited. And it has crew too. So again, it's just given another spell that cascade for free. Uh I generally have a decent amount of cards in my hand, so like I'm gonna just get that free spell, and like it just snowballs. And the last card I wanted to mention that works really, really great with the Sixth Doctor is Parting of Ways. Parting of the Ways, sorry. It is a 6 mana historic saga. It says, exile the top 5 cards of your library. For each non-land card exiled this way, put a number of time counters on that card equal to its mana value. If it doesn't have suspend, it gains suspend. Then chapter 2 is time travel, then time travel again. And then the third chapter is for each opponent, destroy up to 1 target artifact that player controls. So the last chapter is kind of like hogwash. It doesn't really matter. However, so with the Parting of the Ways, anything that costs 3 or less in the top 5 cards comes to me that next turn. Sorry.
Yeah.
3 or less. So I get that spell for free, and then the time traveling twice is pretty fantastic. And then let me tell you, when you get 3 copies of that, it's GG's, my friends. Because you're like exiling the top 15 cards and all your spells cast for free. And then the second turn, you're time travel, time travel, time travel, time travel, time travel, time travel. I think that's
Right.
wibbly wobbly, timey wimey enough.
Right. Like that's such a great example of how interactive this deck is with itself, and when it is allowed to do those very insular and circular things, it ends up doing just really, really remarkable things that you wouldn't see in the normal course of play at all. And this is a pretty terrific example of that.
And here's the cool thing with it. Like, after the first thing, it's not necessarily the best thing to remove to begin with, because like I'm only destroying one thing. The cards are already on suspend, so like that's not going to stop me from casting all those spells. Yes, it slows me down a little bit, but they're eventually going to happen.
Right.
So
it's fascinating because and it's so on theme, obviously, with the source material, that they did all this stuff that is kind of outside the game and kind of alters the way that we interact with those things, and that he chose to use things like suspend as part of the mechanics for this release. But this is a really powerful scenario, because once those cards are out there in suspend, there are things that would make it so you couldn't cast them, but boy, they are super specific, and there's not necessarily a lot of that out there. That's not the kind of game plan that you're used to playing against at all. So the next section is the pieces to get the 13 Doctors, and again, we'll come back to why the 13 Doctors is such an important number. And now we're up to 15 in the canon, but all of that notwithstanding, there was a moment where 13 was the magic number. And so, what are some of the pieces to getting the 13 Doctors that are good for you?
So the first card I picked was the 11th Hour. It searches for a doctor. On the first chapter, it's a 4 mana saga. Chapter 1 is search your library for a doctor card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. And then the second chapter is I create a food token and a 1/1 human creature token with doctor spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, which is pretty fantastic on its own. And then the third thing is I create a token that's a copy of target creature, except it's a legendary alien named Prisoner Zero. Cool thing about that is, since it has a different name, I can copy one of my doctors and I get both of them, and I don't have to like lose any of them because it has a different name, which is pretty cool. So
a way of doubling up effects then.
Right. Just imagine the Sixth Doctor or any of the other doctors. It's just really good to have. So the next card on my list is the An Unearthly Child. Sorry. This is a saga that all 3 chapters are the same. It is a 1 and 2 blue. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a doctor card, a card with Doctor's Companion, or a vehicle card. Put that card into your hand and the rest into the bottom of your library in a random order. So like, this is just a card draw spell that says, hey, here's another doctor or a Doctor's Companion. And it's just, every time I played it, I've loved having this card in play. And I love how it's not a tutor. I like how it's like it is still random, but like it's going to get what the deck wants and what makes it go forward. And then the last one, I really can't wait to cast this spell for its full cost. So it's called the Five Doctors. It is a 6 mana. It's 5 and 1 green. It's a sorcery. It has kicker 5. It says search your library and or graveyard for up to 5 doctors, reveal them, and put them into your hand. If you search your library this way, if the shuffle, if the spell was kicked, put those cards onto the battlefield instead of putting them into your hand. I want to be able to demonstrate this deck. I really want to cast this, demonstrate it, and kick it, because when you demonstrate it, you're gonna have like when you kick it, the demonstrate will see it, and I'll get 10 doctors. And then, by the way, Tim, do you want to search your deck for a doctor and see if you get 5 of them?
I do, but I don't have any in my deck.
Changelings count. Changelings do count.
Oh, good. Well, then I don't have any in my deck.
Yes, I knew it. So I really want to demonstrate it. And I really want to kick it all at once, and I think it would make anybody's day. That's one of those story cards, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if that happens in the game, everybody's going to remember that. Everybody's going to remember where they were the day that somebody kicked the 5 doctors with demonstrate and actually searched for 10 all at once and got them all into play.
Yep.
Well, that seems like it would be a fantastic way to win, and that is the last part that we're going to talk about here is how does it get there? How does this deck cross the finish line?
So the first card I'm going to talk about, we've been mentioning about the 13 an awful lot, and here's where we're talking about it. It's Gallifrey Stands. It is 4, a white and a blue. Whenever Gallifrey Stands enters the battlefield, return all doctor cards from your graveyard to your hand. Then at the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a doctor creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Then if you control 13 or more doctors, you win the game. So I am a huge fan of alternate win cons. I saw this card and I had to break it. The other version of the deck that I built did break it, and I'm not going to do that ever again. I'm sorry, people. I will put the other lists into the show notes just so you can see what my thought processes were. But let me tell you, every time I've had Gallifrey Stands on the board, I've almost won with it 2 or 3 times in a single game. But everyone was like, "No, man, I'm going to destroy all creatures." And I'm like, "Come on, man, I had it."
It's almost like the other people want to win.
But my stories are cooler than other people winning. Am I wrong?
See, that's everyone's the hero in their own story.
Well, I'm like a host in a podcast, so that means I'm a bigger hero, right? Isn't that how that works?
Yeah, some people's faces on the poster are bigger than other people's face on the poster. Is what you're saying. And
I'm also a big dude too, so that also helps.
Right.
So the next card that helps me win is Displaced Dinosaur. It is 5 and 2 green. It's a creature dinosaur. As a historic permanent enters the battlefield under your control, it becomes a 7/7 dinosaur creature token or creature in addition to its other types. So my sagas, my doctors become 7/7 dinosaurs. There's so many the clues I cast from Sarah Jane are doctors, and holy moly, there's so many 7/7s, and they're all dinosaurs, and it's adorable. So I want to alternate art. Whoever's listening to this, please do this for me. I just want to the art to be a plate of dino nuggies onto the board because I want all my foods to be dinosaurs. So if someone could do that for me, that'd be great.
It would. What I think we all need that in our lives. Yeah, this one has showed up in a couple of places, right? The Displaced Dinosaur is it's terrific here, obviously, because you have the historic matters things, but lots of other decks, the treasure decks, food decks, anything that does those things and have greens ought to take a look at this card. It does. The one downside to it is that it does take a turn to really matter
for treasures and stuff too. You can't sack them for mana that turn anymore.
Well, sure. So, but just that, like, the fact that you're making so many of them, and what everything that comes in after this hits play comes in as a dinosaur. But in most cases, that means that they're probably not going to be hasty. So it's going to take a turn, at least one turn cycle, before you can really kind of do damage with it. And I mean, that doesn't mean you're not going to, but it does mean that it's not. It has the
Mhm.
potential to feel like it didn't do anything. And it's a pretty expensive permanent. So. But
Yep.
if it doesn't get dealt with, it'll win you the game.
Yep. And the last card on my list, and I have a feeling this card in particular will win me more games than any of the other cards that I mentioned earlier, is Alistar the Brigadier. He is a 4 mana legendary creature. He is 1 and Bant. He is a human soldier. Whenever you cast a historic spell, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. And then whenever Alistair attacks, you may pay 8. If you do, creatures you control get +X, where X is the number of historic permanents you control. I have a feeling this is just going to be the one that wins me the games because I can put them down early enough. The 1/1s will clog up the board enough that I'm not dying. And then when I have that extra mana, and since most of the deck is historic permanents, I'm realistically going to be like, everyone gets +10/+10. Shame there's no trample, but you can only ask for so much, right?
Right. 8 seems like a lot, but I think you're still right. I still think
Yeah.
that like this one feels like a sleeper to me, that it is going to give you that incremental, I'm just getting soldiers, no big deal, no big deal, no big deal, and the game's going to go long, and at some point you're going to go, okay, I'm moving to combat. Here comes this trigger. Look, I have the 8 mana now. Here's that 6 red mana from Flux just sitting around for some
Right?
reason.
Like, who would have thought? That right there is showing that I'm using all 4 of my colors.
There it is, right? That's right. That's right. It does mean that.
So,
So you've had a chance, and then this deck's gone through changes already, a couple of different ways. You built the version of it that was really broken, and this is the version that you started with, but then it ended up getting upgraded because the 14th Doctor was revealed.
right.
And it just made sense. It made so much sense for that to be the commander. It was the obvious commander to go with. So what do you see as the strengths in its current form?
Let me tell you, the strength of this deck is it's a value engine deck. It takes a little while for the engines to start revving, but once they do, good gracious, it just doesn't stop. I never don't have choices of what I'm gonna do. I'm able to use my graveyard enough. It's not amazing, but I use it enough that I can say, okay, I can use the stuff in my graveyard, I can use the stuff in my hand. My commanders draw me cards or like let me see a lot of cards. And man, let me tell you, it's a lot of fun. Um but those are the strengths of the deck. I've noticed that just holy moly the value.
It really does. And playing across from it, as I said earlier, it has this capacity to, you can really see how it's all compounding, how it's all kind of, working together to create this intrinsic synergy that is going to continue to kind of exponentially grow, or if it is left alone. And I think one of the other strengths that comes up for me is that being what it is, and the cards that you chose to put in your pool, they're not as well known as some other cards, so people
Right.
might actually not realize like threat assessment is a lot harder in a deck like this because it might not be clear. Like take the Sixth Doctor for example, where we look at it, we go, oh, you're copying a historic permanent, you only get to do it once a turn. How much of a
Unless if
big
yeah.
how much of a big deal is that? And then immediately in the next section, you talked about several sagas that if you were to copy any one of them, create an enormous amount of exponential value at that point. So I think that that's a sneaky strength with it as well.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think of the weaknesses?
Whew. It is a very, very complicated deck. There's so many game actions. Since the cards are so new, I miss at least 10 triggers a game. Like that's just me being generous.
Yeah,
Uh with the very limited card pool, it's kind of low on interaction. I don't have the
sure.
best interaction in the world. And there's some cards that I would just love to have that I can't because they're not in my 375 cards. So um just the power level on some of the cards could be like ticked up a little bit more if I had like, a bigger card pool. And then it's a pretty slow, like it's not winning before turn 10. Like I can't even imagine a world how I do win before turn 10.
Yeah, with that card pull, it doesn't. I mean, even the most magical of Christmas lands probably wouldn't be able to put that together for you. So, yeah, I mean, 10 might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but I think that you're probably right. It's still pretty. It's going to take time.
Oh yeah. But I did make changes, so hopefully like I haven't really played this iteration of it yet. Like the previous version, it was actually
Oh
a
yeah,
Morophon deck, right?
right.
And it was a Time Lord tribal deck. And like I was having problems with like not having the right colors because my lands aren't the greatest. I had probably too many black sources for the 5 black cards that were in the deck. And removing that, and it just kind of seems to gel a little bit better. I think it's better, and this is the best iteration of it so far.
That's excellent. So in the last part of the deck tech, we like to talk about like what are some things that we could consider adding to the deck. We like to make a suggestion for each other's decks and then offer at least one card that we have been thinking about individually. So obviously, with the limitations on this deck, I really had a very tough time coming up with a card to add to this because obviously the pool is so small. You've already considered all the cards that I probably
Mhm.
would have suggested. So I'm going to go out of turn and make it off the wall suggestion, which is in the future, should you ever choose to change the restriction, you could change it in a slight way and only include cards from universes beyond, which would open you up to some very, very strange. And I don't know if any of it would be good, but I know we got Fallout coming in the near future.
Yeah,
The Transformers cards are all already out there. Stranger Things is already out there. Walking Dead, like, I don't know if any of those things would matter at all. I'm thinking, though, that Fallout, being set in the sci-fi universe, we
yeah.
haven't
I
seen
was
a...
thinking two sets that I was thinking Fallout specifically and the 40K stuff. Right.
Oh, that's great.
That
I
that might
totally...
that might add some interesting choices.
It was so yeah. I think that we had actually already talked about this when we reviewed Tom Bombadil, where it was like it makes a lot of sense for him to include sagas from all these different universes. It just I'm here for it. It actually is incredibly thematically correct for that to be what's happening. This feels that way too. That like
Right.
if you wanted to limit the pool so that you weren't including just the most bananas things that MTG has ever done, you could still create this very limited pool with just the universes beyond stuff. So how about you? What other cards have you considered adding that you're still kind of kicking around?
Well, so the only card that I could really come up with, it's kind of a cop out. It's not out yet, but it's the 15th Doctor. He is not on the list yet, but I didn't want to make too many proxies for the deck, and he's nothing special, but he is another Doctor, so it would go from 15 Doctors to 16 Doctors. Uh, uh, yeah, it is 17. There's 16 currently in the list, and then he would be Doctor 17. But all he does is whenever the 15th Doctor enters the battlefield or attacks, I mill 3 cards. You may put an artifact that with mana value 2 or 3 from among them into my hand. And then the first non-artifact spell you cast each turn has improvised. So it has like the second ability is probably the only ability that would really matter to me. Because that turns the 4th Doctor into, a 2 mana spell instead of a 6 mana spell, which is pretty cool. Because I do have a decent amount of like clues and other artifacts that come into play and stuff. So
Yeah, that's a little disappointing. It's a little, and again, like this is just now happening in the canon, right? That we're just meeting the 15th Doctor, and we don't know
I
very
th-
much.
I think that's the reason why he's not like he's very broad. I think it's all because there hasn't even been a single episode with him. So all we got is the reveal. I'm assuming I haven't seen the 60th Doctor Who special yet, but I'm assuming it was
I don't know if it, but
the
well,
end reveals him.
Yeah, well, it does. Actually, like I don't by the time we're talking right now, I don't know if his first solo one has aired. I don't think so. But it's coming up soon. But all of that notwithstanding, like it's true that we don't really know enough about the character. I'm surprised they were able to pull anything out at this point because it's like we literally know nothing yet about what kind of characterization that the new Doctor is going to bring to the role. So, but I agree that like it doesn't really have the fact that it only puts put an artifact mana two from among the milled cards. It's so narrow.
It's so
Like there's
narrow. Yeah.
so
Again,
narrow.
it's just the second ability that I'm looking at that
Yeah, so
will add anything to it.
kind of a pseudo ramp, I guess. But yeah, as you said, it adds another Doctor, and within the card pool that you are allowing yourself. So that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense for that reason.
Now that we've discussed everything about the Doctor Who deck, I want to know what's going on in your deck from Wild of Eldraine. So, who is the commander, and what really attracted you to this commander?
So the commander that I built from Wilds of Eldraine is Ilsa. No, I'm sorry, I pronounced that wrong. It's Hylda of the Icy Crown. Definitely distinct from the Disney character, and in no way meant to be the same thing. So Hylda of the Icy Crown is an Azorius commander, two a white and a blue. Whenever you, oh man, my reader's not looking great here. Whenever you tap an untapped creature your opponent controls, you can pay one generic mana. When you do, you can choose one of three different abilities. You can create a 4/4 white and blue elemental creature token. You can put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, or you can scry 2 and then draw a card. So I have always I've always had a hard time with the Azorius commanders. This is not a color pairing that I'm like really, really attracted to. So really what attracted me to this commander was that it had a built-in kind of theme to it. That it was, you're motivated to do a very specific game action that was not necessarily something that comes up a whole lot. And so it kind of forced me into looking at card selections that I never would have chose before, and I think that was definitely what did it. I also think that pound for pound, like 4 mana, 3/4, has a variety of different things that it can do, and I love the fact that it has choices that it can make.
Yeah, I really like the fact that there's like several different things that you can do. You can go in whatever direction you want. You can just draw a whole bunch of cards. You can make a whole bunch of tokens. You can make those tokens bigger. Like all those abilities work really, really well together. And like when it comes down to brass taxes, you can do what's just best for that moment. Hey, I need to look at another card, but oh, this card that I just got is good enough. I don't need to look at it anymore. I'm just going to pump out a whole bunch of tokens. Like the versatility of what this commander can do, and I've seen it, and it's absolutely terrifying. So, what is your rule 0 conversation that you have with this deck?
So lately, since somebody introduced me to it, I'll give them a plug. This website, mtg.cardrealms, has a number calculator on it, and we've talked before about how do you measure the value or the strength level of your deck. I like using this because it's an objective measuring tool. It's like, so if we both put our lists in there, it's going to give us a number. It's using an algorithm that we don't necessarily know the answer to. Anyway, they value this at about a 7, and I would agree with that. I might put it a little lower based on the way that I usually measure decks. One of them being speed. I don't think that this deck is particularly fast. So in Rule 0, I would say I think this is a very, very mid-level deck, 6 or 7, mostly a token deck. Obviously, the commander makes it clear I'm going to be tapping stuff down, trying to get value out of my commander. That's what the deck is trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, everything you're saying is like absolutely true. I feel that your description of it's spot on, and you really can't like that was perfect, just perfect. Anyway, so was there a theme or build limit that you applied to the deck, or were you just jamming the best like Azorius tapping stuff that you could find?
I mean, that's definitely how it started. And I think that we have talked a lot in other episodes about how the way that we build decks has changed over time, some of it for content creation, but just for like the enjoyment of the group, like I don't want to play a deck that's going to make it unfun to play the game. And this one I had to be really careful with because frankly, having a deck that is really built to tap everybody else's stuff down and in some cases keep it tapped down, just with stun counters and not using stuff that keeps everything locked down completely, it still feels a little stacksy. And so I had to be very, very conscious of not putting too many other kinds of stacks effects, because I think that's where it really starts to wear on people, is if you have one kind of thing that's happening. So if I have something on my board that's tapping down one of your creatures each turn, that's a little frustrating, because I'm probably tapping down your best creature, and that's bad for you, right? If I'm doing that and I'm making all your spells cost more and I'm making it so your lands don't untap and whatever, the more that's why it's called that, right? The more stacks that I get, the more frustrated people get. So I had to be very, very conscious of that. And again, I always struggle with Azorius commanders because Azorius is built to control. It's built to play board wipes, play counter spells. Those things are in the deck. So I also wanted to make sure that I was trying to go middle of the road with those things instead of doing the most powerful versions. The irony being that some of the, like I have Cryptic Command, for example, which most people would argue is one of the greater counter spells that exists, even if it's a little expensive. Yeah. But one of its modes is it taps all the creatures down. So it really thematically fits in the deck. And then finally, in terms of build limit, I wanted to build something that was a little outside of the normal play pattern for this color combination. And obviously, tapping down creatures is not outside the normal combination, but this deck is actually going to kill you with damage. Like, I'm going to beat you to death with 4/4 elementals. That's what's going to happen if you lose to this deck. So, being an Azorius deck that is absolutely focused on creating a giant army that's going to win with combat damage, not necessarily your normal Azorius win, which is kind of why I was here for it.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool way to win. Like, it's not every day you see a blue-white tokens deck. Like, there's you'll see white X, and it might have blue in it, but no, most of the time it's not that. And I think you like with all those things, I think you really hit all the things on the head. You're not playing like cards like Tangle Wire or Stasis or anything like that, where it's just like no one's having fun. Where it's like most of the time you're only tapping down creatures. So if you don't have creatures, guess what? There's nothing for him to tap.
That's true. I hadn't considered that, but you're totally right. I think that there probably are some effects that get permanence or that, but really the value, the commander triggers off of creatures, and most importantly, it triggers off of me tapping untapped creatures. So letting your creatures untap is part of the equation. So
right. So it gives you a moment to at least be able to do things with your own cards and stuff, which is kind of nice. So, what's the breakdown of your deck? So we look at really card draw, ramp, sacred target removal, and board wipes. What are the numbers like?
So card draw, I have 18. Ramp, I have 8. Single targeted removal, I have 7. And board wipes, I have 5. I do want to say that in several of those cases, there's some things that are conditional, and as we talked about before, some things I included kind of loosely, but I really think that they still ought to be in the category. Most importantly, in this deck, there are a lot of cards that cantrip. So that 18 card draw number is skewed a little bit because there are just a lot of cards that say, tap this creature, draw a card.
Yeah, it replaces itself.
Right.
So what cards really stick out in each of those categories?
The first one, card draw, so far, there's a couple I could have put in this one, but I think this one is probably the best, and it's called Verity Circle. 2 and a blue, it's an enchantment. Whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes tapped, if it isn't being declared as an attacker, you may draw a card. Most importantly, meaning that they worded it that way, so my opponent's attacking does not cause this to trigger. if I tap down their creature, or if something else does, like if they tap their creature to activate an ability, this does trigger.
Yep.
But what does not trigger it is them declaring their creature as attacker, and that attack action causing the creature to tap. It does have a secondary ability for 4 and a blue to tap target creature without flying. It's relevant, I think, in the long game. I've never actually used it.
Right.
This card draws cards. Obviously, there's so many things in the deck that are built to tap down creatures, and what's most important is you don't have to pay to draw this extra card. And I think what's great about this is having this out and the commander out means I absolutely get to focus on making tokens, because this one's already drawing me cards. I don't have to make that hard decision with the commander between making the token or drawing the card, because I'm already drawing the card. I can definitely focus more on building the army.
One thing I really love about this card is how many cards you will draw with this card. Like, I could see in a world where you're drawing like 15, 20 cards off of this thing, no questions asked. And that means you remove it on site, people. Okay?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, and again, I could put other cards in this thing. Right, there is a heuristic study in the deck, and so
That's
like
boring, though.
Well, it has the same quality where it's like, I think that this card deserves as much respect as that one does.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Is
Oh,
that
absolutely.
if I put this out there, you treat it like a heuristic study and get rid of it immediately. It's if you don't, and in the games that I have played with it, I should have counted the last time I played this card,
Oh,
because it was an extraordinary amount of cards that I
I was
drew.
about to say that's your homework assignment. Next time, get a giant D20 like this bad boy right here, and then just boom, 1, 2, and just see how many cards you draw. So we covered a card draw. What's the ramp piece that you're looking at? That's
just like you discussed earlier. Like, this one was tough because it's an Azorius deck. There isn't a lot of ramp in it. I actually originally had some creatures, like some of the white creature ramp that exists, the sneaky white ramp that everybody's always talking about. I just didn't. I ran out of room. I did not have the room for it, and I still think that maybe I should make some room for it, because it is, unfortunately,
it's a little low.
It is. It's low, and I don't really feel like, again, I haven't played the deck enough to really feel that sting, but I'm imagining that there's a place. Anyway, so the one I came up with is, I chose it because it is a ramp card, but it's the utility of it that I think that makes it interesting. And on theme, it is the sonic screwdriver. So I remember being very happy about including this in the deck, because we've been talking so much about the Doctor Who cards lately. But what I love about it is that it has the untap another target artifact. So it's got the Voltaic Key line in there, and there's definitely some other artifacts in this deck. Icy Manipulator, Hylda's Crown of Winter, artifacts that tap my opponent's creatures down. This turns into another one of those if one of those is in play. So I think that that's very, very useful for that reason.
Yeah, I really do love the utility of that card, because like in my doctor deck, I sometimes just use it to scry. Like,
oh yeah,
like, because I get to look at the top of my library, like if I'm cascading into something. Enough about my deck. We've talked way too much about that. Let's go back to yours. What's the exciting single targeted removal you got?
This one's not new, but I think that it is, like, I like to include this in every Azorius deck I build, and it's Fractured Identity. 3, a white and a blue, sorcery speed, exile target permanent. Each player other than its controller creates a token of it. I do this for the lols, man. This one is so much fun, and I really try to prioritize not necessarily threats, but things that are going to be very funny if everyone gets a copy of it, other than the person who cast it. So I just think that this is the highest fun value card for single targeted removal.
That's pretty exciting. I'm just waiting for you to Fractured Identity, the phage that you steal from somebody.
Yes.
Kill everybody with it, because you don't have black in your identity, and it makes me sad.
Yeah. The phage that I steal from somebody. That's it.
Yep. We're gonna get you there. And what board wipe, special board wipe do you got for us?
Again, there's 5 in here, which I ended up thinking that was quite a lot, and I had put one on my list, and then when I looked through, I'm gonna make a last minute adjustment here and talk about the one that's on theme, which is Sunblast Angel.
Ooh,
Yeah, Sunblast Angel's 4 and 2 white. It's a 4/5 flying angel. When Sunblast Angel enters the battlefield, destroy all tapped creatures.
dude, when you played the one game, it was so devastating
It
because it's
was.
so one-sided.
Yes. And that's why I think, well, first off, obviously it's on theme because I'm tapping everybody else's creatures down, and there are definitely spells and creatures that allow me to do that to everybody right at the end of my last opponent's turn, so I can get everybody else's board tapped down before I untap, cast this before combat, and I just had a one-sided board wipe. So it's not cheap. It requires a lot of setup, but if it goes off, this could be very, very devastating.
Such a good card. I'm so glad you picked that over what you have on our notes here.
Yeah.
So much better.
Yep.
So I have a feeling we already know what the goals of their deck are, but what goals did you bring along for us today?
Surprising no one, goal number 1 is tap down my opponent's creatures.
Who saw that one coming?
Goal 2 is generate value from tapping down my opponent's creatures. And in this particular deck, I guess that BW should be UW, making lots of blue-white elemental tokens or other tokens. And I realized after kind of going through today and really analyzing the deck, I don't have as many token creators as I thought I did, and it's something maybe I want to work on later. And then finally, sending that token army to victory, going over and sending all my ice monsters over to kill people.
Yeah, I mean those goals seem pretty solid. By the way, make sure when you're calculating damage, you don't kill everyone else that's not a guy that has 5 untap or 5 tap 4/4s and die immediately because of it. Don't be like don't be like this guy.
Yeah, respect the 4/4 elementals when there are a whole army of them in play, because
Yeah.
they will kill you.
Absolutely and utterly. Anyway, so the first goal was to tap down your opponent's creatures.
Mhm. So
What kind of cards are doing that for us today?
there's some obvious choices here. I'm going to talk about the ones that the ones that I think have been really really effective for me. I'm actually going to start with one that I deliberately put this in the deck when I started conceptualizing the deck. I was like, this is definitely going to be an angle that I take. And if you look at other builds of this deck, I don't really see a whole lot of other people doing this, but I really like this in premise, and it is Isochron Scepter. So I'm going to make the agreement to the entire world right now on recording that I'm only ever going to put on Isochron Scepter in this deck. I'm only ever going to put a card that taps down creatures.
Oh, well, that's fair, I guess.
That is the whole reason that is in the deck. I'm not going to put Dovin's Veto on this. I'm not gonna put Counterspell on this. They're both in the deck. Never going on there. What I'm gonna put on this is cards like Hithlane Knots, which is a Lord of the Rings card. There's other cards like it, but this one has the most upside. So it's 2 mana, tap target creature, scry 1, draw a card. So with that on Isochron Scepter, it turns Isochron Scepter into 2 mana. I do that every turn. And again, since it's already drawn me a card, it gives me that ability to make tokens with the commander. So it's that perfect mix of tapping and also drawing cards.
All right.
The next choice is one that's really been an all-star every time that I've played it, and it's my namesake, Timon, the Youthful Geist. First off, it's a partner, so it digs a card out, like it draws on ETB essentially, but it doesn't draw any card. It draws a very specific card. Tutors for its partner, which I think is a very underrated mechanic, especially when they both work very well, as they do in this deck. Both of them are in there, and they're both very good. It's a 3/4 flying spirit. At the beginning of each combat, tap up to 1 target creature.
That E is so good.
It's so good. Beginning of mine, beginning of player 2, player 3, player 4. 4 times around for free, I am tapping down a creature. It is so very good. And there, you can just see the incremental value that it creates. And it's also a 3/4 flyer, so it's really going to chip in some early damage as well. And then the last one in the tap down section, again, there's lots and lots of cards in the deck that do this, but these are the ones that are really like overwhelmingly good. And the last one I put in here is Junk Winder.
Mhm.
And this is 5 and 2 blue. It's got affinity for tokens, so if I've already got an army out, it's real cheap to cast. And then whenever a token enters the battlefield under your control, you can tap target non-land permanent and opponent controls, doesn't untap. So it does the stun thing, although it's not actually a stun counter here, just a latent effect. So this with the commander,
really
it is. So this with the commander is I make a token, it triggers this, taps something down, triggers the commander, pay 1, make a token. I repeat that for as many generic mana as I have. And what that translates to is I just tapped however many generic mana I have, and I made that many tokens. So 4, 5, 6 tokens, not an unreasonable thing. This thing costs 7 to begin with, remember. So
it costs 2 blue. Don't lie.
It costs 2 blue, but so on the turn I play it, I can cast it, and if I'm able to immediately tap something down, it starts the cycle, and it comes in with 5 friends almost every time. So
Absolutely.
it is very, very uncommon, very, very powerful.
Now, I actually have a question before we get into the next section. Do you have an Isochron package, or do you have like how many Isochron Scepter cards do you have in the deck that aren't counter spells that you would be like willing to put on there?
6.
Okay, so it's not so bad.
And there are 14 instants in the decks. There are several others on there that could go on there. And obviously there's 2 counter spells that I could potentially put on there, but I want very badly to never have to do that. So the goal very much is to get Pressure Point or hit Blame Knots or Feeling of Dread. Feeling of Dread taps 2 creatures down.
Pretty
for
solid.
2 mana. So
all right, so we talked about tapping down all our stuff. So what cards do you use to generate that value other than your commander?
So the first one is the other half of the partner combo with Timon. This is Rhoda, the Geist Avenger, 3 and a white, 3/3 human soldier with vigilance. Whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes tapped, if it isn't being declared as an attacker, put a +1/+1 counter on Rhoda. So the value here is just one very large creature, but it really is relevant, and Rhoda has vigilance. So you create this very, very giant threat that stays on defense the entire time, and again, it just gets so many counters so quickly. It becomes a giant monster that people have to deal with.
Yeah, vigilance is a very underrated ability too.
And remember that I have the destroy all tapped creatures. So vigilance is very relevant in this deck in particular. The other 2 cards are both out of Wilds of Eldraine, and they were very obviously specifically designed with this commander in mind. The first one is Shirai of the Numbing Depths. This is a Merfolk Wizard, 2 a white and a blue, 2/3. ETB, tap target creature and opponent controls, put a stun counter. Stun counter reads like that, like the Junk Winder, where it can't untap. It's a little bit different. It's actually if a permanent with a stun counter would become untapped, remove a counter from it instead. Remove the stun counter from it. In practice, it ends up being the same thing, but there's subtle differences in gameplay.
If you had like proliferate or something,
right? You could actually. That's actually right. You keep it tapped down that way. Or if you had an effect that would untap the creature before your untap step, you could use the untap thing to remove the stun counter. It works that way as well. More importantly is Shirai's second half, which is whenever you tap 1 or more untapped creatures your opponents control, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn, but it's another card draw engine, and I'm doing it on other people's turns anyway. Right. So again, this is one of those that can get you about 4 cards around, and often will if you've got Timon or something similar.
I was about to say Timon just says draw a card every turn.
Right, with this card in play, I'm drawing an extra card every turn, absolutely. And then the last one in this section, again from Wilds of Eldraine, this is Solitary Sanctuary, 2 and a white. It's an enchantment. When Solitary Sanctuary ETBs tap target creature and opponent controls, put a stun counter on it. When you tap an untapped creature and opponent controls, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So it's just incremental. It starts the tap down loop. It also makes it so that one creature is going to get very, very big very, very quickly. Kind of has that Rhoda benefit, but you get to choose where it goes.
Pretty cool. So that's the value engine that you have in your deck. So the next thing you had mentioned is you want to make a lot of tokens. So what are doing it?
I do want to do that. And as I said earlier, this is an area where I actually don't have as much as I thought I did. And it's definitely something that I want to take a look at. Obviously, the commander does this, but you
Mhm.
don't necessarily want that to be your only resource for that if that's
Right.
what's going on. There are a fair amount of non creatures in this deck. So I included Monastery Mentor. I've also had Monastery Mentors sitting in my
I love that
binders
card.
since whatever the set they were, Fate Reforged came out,
Mhm.
and boy, I have had them. I've never used them. So anyway, it went in this deck. My Monastery Mentor, 2 and a white, 2/2 human monk prowess. So if a non-creature spell gets him +1/+1 till end of turn, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, make a 1/1 white monk that also has prowess. So these monks can be are a force to be reckoned with, especially if you are repeatedly casting non-creature spells with which the deck definitely
Right.
does do. Second in this category is Mondrak Glory Dominus. So this is our token doubler. 2 and 2 white. It's a 4/4 Phyrexian horror. One or more tokens would be created under your control. Twice that many are created instead. 1 and 2 Phyrexian white. Sack 2 other artifacts and/or creatures. Put an indestructible counter on Mondrak. Again, I included Mondrak because it was a creature, and that is also the token doubler. I think that I'm not actually 100% sure that it needs to be in the deck. I'm now kind of thinking that maybe another token generator would make more sense, but I haven't really gotten to it, so I don't know. Like
I mean, the
I
card's really, really good, and with your commander, it seems solid, and the fact that it makes itself indestructible makes it harder to remove. And
yeah.
like, I'd rather Mondrak over like Anointed Possession or something along those lines.
And that's why it is in there. Is that I didn't have it. I didn't want to put an possession in there because I just really had a feeling like it wasn't going to do anything. So Mondrak seemed like the better choice. But now I'm really kind of thinking I don't know if I have enough token generators to really make Mondrak work.
And that's
Other
fair.
than other than my commander, which you don't really want to bank on always having your commander. And then finally, in this section, this card makes a token, but I wanted to include it because I just think it is a generically good card that I'm glad I had a copy of to kind of put into the deck, and it is Virtue of Loyalty. So this is also from Wilds of Eldraine, 3 and 2 white. It's an enchantment that goes on an adventure. Arden Vale Fealty is 1 and a white instant adventure. Create a 2/2 night creature token with vigilance. Vigilance again showing up here. The enchantment, the actual Virtue of Loyalty side, is at the beginning of your end step. Put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control and untap those creatures.
Wow.
So it just makes your team bigger at the end of every turn that you have. And again, if I'm generating a lot of new tokens on
And
my turn, I just made those tokens way bigger.
and that's pseudo vigilance too. Like
It
again,
is.
like it's just showing up again, again, like time and time and again. That's super solid. I really like that. So we talked about how you're creating the tokens. Well, how are you getting those tokens to my face?
So this is another area that I think I could use some improvement on. But remember that the deck taps creatures down. So
Mm,
it's actually very skillful at getting pings out of the way so that I can get in there and deal that damage. But this is another way around that, and is Aven Wind Guide out of Amon Cat from a while ago.
love this
Two,
card.
2 a white and a blue. It's a 2/3 flying vigilance. Creature tokens you control have flying and vigilance.
Ugh, so
Yeah,
good.
so this makes all of my ice monsters flying snowballs. And it also has Embalm itself, so it can come back from the graveyard as a token, which is relevant if you had Mondrak, so you got 2 of them, but otherwise,
Having multiples doesn't really matter either.
right. So most importantly, it can come back from the graveyard. So if it dies, you can get it back later. But it is a way to get things out of the way. Otherwise, the other things I included in this section were just probably the most universal and widespread tap everything down effects. One of these being Tempest Caller. There are other creatures that do this. I was on something of a budget building this deck, so I ended up finding like the lowest dollar cost ways to do
Sure.
this. Tempest Caller is on there, 2 and 2 blue, 2/3 ETB, tap all creatures, target opponent controls. So I'm only getting one person with this, but I like it when I need to get through and kill that one person. That's what Tempest Caller is there for.
Yeah.
And then spells like Icy Blast, which is just X and a blue, tap X target creatures. And in this case, it's got Ferocious. If I have a creature with power 4 or greater, like a 4/4 blue and white elemental, those creatures don't untap during their next untap step.
Oh,
So,
okay.
and it's an instant. So just tapping down to somebody's board on my last opponent's end step leaves me open to be able to swing in and kill them.
Right.
I think I might have actually
It
used
could also
Icy
be like a
Blast.
fog too.
That's absolutely right. If some like that's the other benefit of having all these tap down effects is that it is defensive as well.
That's one thing that I've noticed a lot was every every time that I played against that deck, your life total's at 40.
Yep.
Your 4/4s are just so strong, and the fact that we can't attack because all our stuff is tapped down. That's what I've noticed every time I played it. So now that we've gone over all the goals in your deck, what are some of the strengths that you have for this deck? Like what things really just get them engines going?
So I think that like remarkably, and I usually don't build decks this way, but this deck has a lot of interaction by virtue of what it is doing. So because so many of the spells tap down my opponent's creatures, it really means, as you said, I can kind of play the defensive game early on just to keep myself in the game until the engine starts going. And then once it is, that same action that I've already been taking to keep myself in the game is now advancing my game.
Right.
So that a lot of interaction really, and in blue and white, you get pretty effective interaction because they've got some powerful counter spells that are very low cost. Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, some of the cheapest targeted removal in the format. Having access to all those things means that there's lots of interaction and it is relatively inexpensive. I think that this deck plays an unexpected game, and
that's so crucial.
Yeah, and I think that makes, and I don't suppose it will be that way forever. I'm sure that it's I don't think it's going to be wildly popular, and there's so many commanders these days that people can play against. But once somebody's on to what this deck is doing, I think they could probably pretty quickly figure out how to combat it. But I do think that it plays an unexpected game. So if you've never seen it before, it may very well surprise you in the strategy. And really, I think that it is surprisingly aggressive. I think increasing the ramp to make it a little bit faster would make the starts aggressive in the way that we usually think about it. Like it would make it become aggressive quickly. But once it gets a board full of 4/4s, I'm not attacking you for 5. I'm attacking you for 20.
Right.
Like I'm attacking you for 24, 28. Like these, 4 divisible numbers. So it really, again, it's a white blue deck that swings at you with giant monsters, and I think that puts people off guard.
And that's what I really like about it. The fact that your commander can pump your creatures, that your commander makes the creatures, that your commander gets you the value engine pieces that allow you to do it even more is so crucial. And like I don't know if you just get kept off your commander, it would just keep you off your whole entire game plan for the rest of the game. But like this deck's going to be playing that slower game and protecting itself. So even if it does, and your commander costs 12 mana or whatever, you'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
So what are some of the weaknesses that you think could be changed in the future?
You definitely nailed one just now, which I've kind of been alluding to it the whole time, is that it's very possible that this deck is not going to function the same without access to its commander. So if people have those kind of more creative ways of dealing with it, i.e. like Darksteel Mutation, those other things that, Kenrith Transformation, those things that nerf the commander but don't remove it from the board, that's gonna be tough for me. I don't know how well I'm going to be able to deal with some of those things if they resolve, right? And so if somebody is able to keep my commander off the board, I'd have to cobble together several other pieces to have the same kind of impact. And that's why I was saying that if I have this stuff that pays off on tokens, I probably should have at least some more token generators in there.
Yeah,
So
maybe.
it's something to think about. And again, so honestly, the deck has won a fair amount of the time that it's
True.
played. So I don't want to like mess with it too much, but it's just something I'm thinking about. And then I actually think it is kind of weak on finishers. I think that it could use just a little bit more oomph at the tail end
Sure.
to really send it over the top.
So do you think finishers like tap all your opponent's creatures down at once spells, or are you talking about like boom, now my creatures are huge kind of thing?
I actually think the latter. I think that making the army that I have either evasive or huge or both. Like I think that that is the way to go because I am already tapping a lot of stuff down. So it's about I want to be able to close out faster.
Sure.
So really, like making and actually, a card just occurred to me that might work in that way. But yeah, it's something. So I do think making the creatures bigger is what I'm getting at.
Okay. So this is the part where we start talking about cards that we would maybe consider adding into the deck. Uh, so I'm going to go ahead and start with another Doctor Who card because, I'm on a Doctor Who kick. And that's Zygon Infiltrator. It is a 3 mana creature. It's 2 and a blue. And it has body print. For 2 and a blue, tap another target creature and put a stun counter on it. Zygon Infiltrator becomes a copy of that creature for as long as that creature remains tapped. Activate only as a sorcery. So you can't make Zygon into 2 different things at once, which would be really weird. But I think this card goes great. It taps your things down. You're getting their best creature on your own side of the board. You don't get ETBs, but who needs ETBs when you have cool static abilities and stuff?
Yeah, it hits a lot of the marks. It really does. I think the only thing that would like that would discourage me from including something like that is that it really just does activate once. Like it taps down a
Yeah.
creature once, but like the other side of that is thematically it goes with the deck, and then it does something that is really powerful that isn't necessarily on theme.
And I think it's quite
I'm
unique too. So
yeah, I'd be curious to know, or curious to see how impactful that would be in different situations. Like,
yeah.
if being able to copy that creature was really was as meaningful as it sounds like it should be.
Yeah. But I mean, putting a stun counter on something also seems pretty good.
Right.
So
So my card to include is in line with what I have been talking about. The only reason I didn't actually put this card in from the gate is that at the time it was still pretty cost prohibitive. It's not quite so much now, but when Wilds of Eldraine first launched, this card was quite expensive. It has decreased a significant amount, down to a fairly reasonable amount, and it is the White Crater Hoof Behemoth. It's called Moonshaker Cavalry, 5 and 3 white, 6/6 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain flying and get +X/+X till end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. I think that like this is the answer. And again, the deck doesn't actually have a lot of tutors. It also doesn't have a lot of ramp. That'd be my other concern with this card, though, is that it is
can you
actually
cast it? Yeah.
can I cast it? It is very expensive, so I'd have to sort that out. But it is the finisher I think that this deck wants.
Yeah,
It
that's a
really,
pretty solid finisher,
yeah,
all things considered.
and Crater Hoof's become something of a taboo recently. Like people talk about it like something as if it were a finisher that is not okay to play. When I really think that what's fussy for people is that when Crater Hoof gets cheated out, or when it comes out like super early after they've built a large board of tiny creatures, it feels very broken in that scenario.
Right.
I mean, in this case, this would be it's turn 8. I have enough mana to
Right.
play
Right.
Moonshaker. I have enough mana to play Moonshaker now, and I'm gonna close this game out if nobody has anything to say about
It's
it.
the
So
fairest way to do it. Right.
yeah, and I think at that point, again, if I have enough tokens on board and I cast Moonshaker, I might actually be able to kill everyone. Which that's kind of
Right.
that's what I'm getting at. The deck can definitely take single players out, but then you're playing the game of who is the person I'm going to take out, and can I stop the other 2 people from rallying and killing
Right.
me afterwards?
Right. No, I 100% agree. And I think Moonshaker with you paying or its mana cost makes it more fair. And I don't think it's a taboo against Craterhoof. I think it's just more along the lines of, we've seen this already, do something original. I feel that's the more Crater, like, it's a boring way to win Craterhoof.
It's so funny though. It's like, I mean, yeah, I think I agree with you. I do think that that's
Right.
really what's going on with people. It's like saying it's boring to win with creature damage.
I know. It makes it easy. It's the I win button, I guess.
Yeah,
But
and I think, and we talk about this a lot. Like you want your deck to have that. Like you
you
do
need it
want to.
sometimes.
Absolutely do. Like you need to. I put at least one like game-ending combo or card in just about every deck that I have, and I'll be very cautious about playing it to like allow the game to play out and be fun. But I want it to be in there in
Right.
case we get locked down and things start to get really. So we have that 3.5 hour game. And
Oh,
like, oh yeah, we want
oh.
to we got to close it out at some point, so you got to have the thing in there, right?
Yeah, that 3.5 hour game was absolutely miserable. But anyway, I think
We
now
Yeah,
where we're gonna wrap things up here.
we'll tell you all about that other game some other time. So I just have to say, I don't want to go. But it is that time again, our friends and opponents. So we say thank you kindly for spending so much time with us here at the ACA Commander Podcast. I'd like to remind you all again that you can support this show and all of our other content by watching this and other videos on the YouTube page, by checking out our streams on Twitch. You can find those links in the description.
So before we scoop things up, we want to hear from the Zombie Horde about your newest builds. What commanders are you playing from the newest sets? Are there commanders from the Doctor Who or Wilds of Eldraines that you're excited about? Tell us about what you have been building lately, and let us know if you have any suggestions for the decks we discussed today. As always, thank you for playing along with us, and have a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye.